My guest at this time is Jennifer Braceras. She is a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, and she's a former commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She is also the author of a column that appeared in the Boston Globe that says Feinstein, meaning Dianne Feinstein, the top Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, played Dr. Christine Ford like a pawn in this Kavanaugh confirmation process. And Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Obviously, a lot of criticism about how Feinstein has handled this, not making this letter that Ford sent her available to the full committee until after the FBI had finished the background investigation, until after all of the confirmation hearings and so forth. What specifically about her actions over the past number of weeks leads you to believe she played Ford like a pawn?
Well, it's not just a procedural mistake. It was a deliberate act on Senator Feinstein's part. And what that tells me is that this is not a woman, Feinstein that is, who's concerned about the possibility of a serial predator taking a seat on the Supreme Court. In other words, her concern wasn't actually with whether or not Dr. Ford is telling the truth. She didn't care if Dr. Ford was telling the truth or if she was making the whole thing up, because Feinstein's objectives her objective was not to protect the court from a potential rapist or to protect the court from Brett Kavanaugh. Her goal was to protect the court from any Trump nominee, which is why she held it in an effort to delay till after the midterms.
What would she have done if she really was concerned, in your estimation, about Dr. Ford and the allegations she was making?
Well, I can tell you what I would have done. I would have taken the allegation to the FBI at that juncture and asked them to reopen the file. I would have asked them to do it confidentially. I would have spoken with Dr. Ford and said, we can respect your right to privacy, but we need the FBI to look into this. And if I found it to be credible, I would have gone to my Republican colleagues for sure and asked them to join me in asking the president to send forward a new nominee. If I really believed that this person had sexually assaulted somebody, that's what I would have done. But Dianne Feinstein wasn't concerned about that because she didn't believe that.
Jennifer, you're an attorney, and obviously there's some people who are worried that the allegations could be true, and they obviously wouldn't want someone with that background on the Supreme Court. Some people just say, look, all this chaos, regardless of whether it's true now, and it's 36 years ago, so there's a lot that people don't remember. There's nothing we can actually prove. But just the fact that this is hanging over him means that it's bad for the court going forward. What's your view on that?
Well, I don't disagree that it's bad for the institutional legitimacy of the court, although I think that's part of the left's long game, right? So if they lose on the merits and Kavanaugh is confirmed, they still win because they're able to use it to cast dispersion on the court, potentially pack the court when they eventually regain power. And so the left plays a very long game, and we are left in the position of playing prevent defense, which doesn't work. I don't know what the answer to that is. I certainly don't think it's capitulating. But there is a point to that, and that's to the argument that it will cast a cloud over the court, and that's part of their strategy.
Also, when you call Dr. Ford a pawn, or Feinstein played Ford like a pawn, it leaves the implication that Dr. Ford is another victim in this process, not just potentially a victim of what happened decades ago, but how she was dealt with in this process. Other folks would say that, look, we know what her politics are. They're not the politics of this administration. She hired a very activist Democratic attorney. She got legal counsel advice from Feinstein's office, so she might not exactly be the apolitical shrinking violet that some would portray her to be.
Maybe, maybe not. I think she's been used as a pawn by Senator Feinstein. She struck me when she testified as a very timid person, as somebody who's been sort of pushed out there on behalf of a movement. But I think she's been used as a pawn by the left. And frankly, I think Kavanaugh has been used as a pawn by the left to make a larger cultural point and, to rewrite history, to make a larger cultural point, to delegitimize the court, all of those things.
What do you make of her attorneys, if in fact this is the case? It certainly appeared that way last week, that her attorneys either didn't inform her or didn't fill her in as well as they should have about the option of not having to testify in front of the whole world. It could have been done out on the West Coast.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it was so well known to the world, to anybody who reads the paper or is on Twitter, that these offers had been made for Senate investigators to go out to the West Coast. The fact that Dr. Ford didn't know about it was shocking to me, because I knew about it and most people I know knew about it. So I wasn't sure whether she wasn't telling the truth there or whether the lawyers had deliberately kept it from her.
You mentioned
either way, it's not good.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned also in your Boston Globe column on this same line that in addition to Dianne Feinstein not wanting a Trump appointee on the court, that ultimately for Democrats, this issue has almost entirely come down. The whole confirmation Supreme Court vacancy and filling those vacancies, the whole process for them has come down to abortion. How did we get there, and what's the impact of that?
Well, the left has long believed that the only thing that stands between women in the back alley is Anthony Kennedy. And so that's why when Kennedy retired, they became hysterical about this. And, you'll hear the left say time and time again, well, this isn't just our political strategy, because if it was a political strategy, we would have, done this to Neil Gorsuch. And we didn't do that to Neil Gorsuch. Therefore, it must be about Kavanaugh. But that's not true, because the difference is that Neil Gorsuch was nominated to fill the seat of Justice Scalia. And so it was a status quo nomination. Whereas in the view of the left, the Kennedy seat is the pivotal seat to protect Roe v. Wade. That's what they think. I could argue till I'm blue in the face that they're not right about that, but that is what they believe. And so they were going to fight tooth and nail to stop any jurisprudential conservative from filling that seat. They made that clear from the beginning.
We've been seeing pretty nasty confirmation fights for better than 3 decades now, going all the way back to the failed attempt to get Robert Bork on the Supreme Court during the Reagan administration. Yeah. And every time we see these fights, sometimes it's not even for the Supreme Court. It could be for the appellate court or even some district court judges. People talk about how it's just only getting uglier. It's got to get better. What's your assessment? Is this only going to get uglier, or is there a way to reverse what we're seeing in some of these confirmation battles?
I think the only way to reverse it is for us to play the long game. And what I mean by that is we need to double down on teaching basic American civics, because the reason that we're always caught playing defense in these battles is because most Americans don't understand the proper role of the court. And the left has been very successful in portraying the role of the court and the importance of any single nomination as a political fight. If you're for abortion, you should be against Kavanaugh. If you are, for X, Y, or Z, you should be for a certain nominee. And that's not really what the founders intended. It's not the institutional role of the court. And until Americans understand that, they can be manipulated by the left into thinking that, a nomination like this is worth dying for, is worth, engaging in political, opposition research, is worth destroying a man's name and reputation. And until we make clear what the role of the court really is, it's going to continue in that way.
Last question before we let you go, Jennifer. Based on your expertise with the Civil Rights Commission and your time as an attorney, we also see an interesting collision here between politics and the Me Too movement. On the one hand, you've got folks who are pleased to see that people who are perhaps engaging in bad behavior are getting called out on it, sometimes decades after the fact, like Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and all these other people, Matt Lauer. On the other hand, you got people who are concerned, and maybe it's the politics of the moment, but depending on how you frame the accusation, it could probably be lodged on both sides, is that they're worried that the simple making of the accusation somehow qualifies as evidence that the accusation is true, and so they're worried about due process getting shredded here. So how do you view it?
That's a complicated question. And, I heard Professor Alan Dershowitz on the news the other day, and he made an analogy that I thought was really compelling. And he said this. He said, let's just assume for the sake of argument that Hillary Clinton had won the presidency. And Hillary Clinton appointed the first Muslim American to the United States Supreme Court. And Senator Charles Grassley received a letter in the mail from somebody that person went to high school with saying, this person was a member of a terror cell in high school, and accusing that person of engaging in terrorist activities. Let's just say from there that Chuck Grassley held the letter, didn't report it to the FBI, and behaved the same way that Dianne Feinstein did with these allegations of sexual assault against Brett Kavanaugh. What presumption of innocence would you want that nominee to have, right? And so Professor Dershowitz posed this question as a way of challenging the left to say, the presumption of innocence has to be the same regardless of who the nominee is. The burden of proof has to be the same, whether it's a nominee you like or a nominee you don't like. So if you don't think that it would be fair to assume that a Muslim nominee was part of a terrorist on the basis of a single 30-year-old allegation, then you can't possibly think it's fair to make those assumptions about Brett Kavanaugh.
Fascinating analysis, and one that I know a lot of people are concerned about, and even people who don't necessarily have a political axe to grind see some real danger signs out there if, in fact, that sort of attitude is allowed to go forward, that you don't need a lot of evidence to really derail not just a nomination, but potentially someone's life in a criminal setting. So, Jennifer, thanks very much for being with us today. We greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Jennifer Braceras is a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. She's a former commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.